So good morning, good afternoon, good evening, depending on where you are. My name is Joana Soares, and I welcome you to the very first Marine Biodiversity Networking Friday. These sessions on marine biodiversity are brought to you by the Air Center and the Marine Biodiversity Observation Network, or concisely the MBON, and will occur once every month. So to briefly contextualize you, the MBON is the marine branch of the group of Earth Observations Biodiversity Observation Network, or GEOBON. MBON is a global network which is formally represented by three co-chairs: Isabel Sousa Pinto from Europe, Frank Muller-Karger from the America, and Masa Nakaoka from the Asia Pacific. MBON is also represented by its secretariat, which is hosted by the Air Center, and which is here represented by me and my colleague Alice. We also have a steering committee, which is composed by members of all over the globe. So I want to give you a brief overview of MBON and how we arise to these collaborations. And the MBON main goal is to build a global community of practice to characterize marine biodiversity worldwide. We want to address how marine biodiversity is changing and how that affects us. In this sense, MBON works with several organizations, both national and international, that are related with marine biodiversity and promotes the observation of life at the sea. Also, MBON also promotes best practices and open data sharing through OBIs or other open databases. Very importantly, we are devoted to the dissemination of knowledge and to the development of products to inform the society, governments, and also international organizations on practices and policies for conservation and a sustainable use of marine biodiversity. In this context, I am very happy to welcome you to this first series with the first session on marine biodiversity and how to organize a global community of practice for the UN Ocean Decade. We had almost 400 registrations from 55 different countries, and today we will have an amazing set of panelists, namely Frank Muller-Karger, which is one of the MBON co-chairs, Linwood Pendleton from the Ocean Knowledge Action Network, and Kristen Yarincik from the Consortium of Ocean Leadership. So I wish you all a fruitful session.
Thank you, Joanna, and hello, everybody. This is the first session of the MBON, the Marine Biodiversity Networking Fridays, but we're going to dedicate it to our first Marine Life 2030 session. Many of you participated in the proposal for Marine Life 2030 as an Ocean Decade program, and here we are. We're starting the program now, and I think that we're going to have a very busy decade trying to organize this and getting our products out. As you can see, we have a logo, we have a website. The website is down at the bottom here, marinelife2030.org, and we'll slowly populate that website with activities and things that we would like to share with you. So the proposal was submitted last year. It included over 37 international academic institutions, but also several government and non-governmental organizations, many of the national government partners and private sector partners. And we want to grow that group. There's many things that we need to do, from everything from organizing ourselves, working with other Ocean Decade programs, fundraising. And these are some of the things that we want to talk to you about today, is how do we get to that organization. So just to recap very briefly, the Decade of the Ocean, the UN Decade of Ocean Science for Sustainable Development, which to me means development and conservation and linking users and science, was proclaimed in 2017. So it started this year in January, and it goes to 2030. So our activities are planned for, the activities that we need to plan are for this decade, but going beyond the decade. And again, this is something that we're going to cover in this hour. The decade is organized around this framework. It has the core objectives are around knowledge. How do you get that knowledge? how do you organize the knowledge, and then how do you use that knowledge for sustainable development and conservation. The way that they plan to do this is through decade actions. And so Marine Life 2030 is a program. It's basically an overarching action that is intended to last for a long time and have a big geographic coverage. And so that's where we all come in. It also requests other types of actions like projects, and that's something that we need to talk about today. Activities and contributions can be things like organizing events or funding that you have to coordinate with the decade as well. But we are at the level of a program, and our intent is to address some of these challenges that are listed on the right. While all of these challenges are relevant, Marine Life 2030 specifically focused on challenge number 2, which is protecting ecosystems and biodiversity, challenge 9, which is basically capacity development, and challenge 10, which is exciting humanity about what goes on in the ocean. So over 30 programs were selected for the Ocean Decade back in June. A few more were added just recently in October. And Marine Life has to now find a way to work with all of these different programs. Many of you represent either Marine Life 2030 or are involved in some of these other programs. The danger that we run is that we all separate these programs into separate silos, and we don't want that. For the decade to work, we need to work together. We need to work, for example, with the Ocean Best Practices Group or the Ocean Biomolecular Observing Network, which is very much sort of a sister program to Marine Life 2030, and all of the other ones that are listed below. Two that are really critical are empowering women and the early career ocean professionals. Many of you are part of that, and we welcome your participation and interaction with us. So just a brief history, including marine life and ocean observing is nothing new. It goes way back, and it was initially proposed under the Global Ocean Observing System when that was incorporated into the Intergovernmental Oceanographic Commission back in 1991. The Census of Marine Life actually provided a pilot for this that lasted 10 years with over $650 million provided by the AP Sloan Foundation, plus a lot of contributions that many other groups, institutions around the world, individuals. So it is a program that you can scope to about $1 billion for a decade of activities around marine life. And that's the kind of scope that Census of Marine Life brought and that we have to reconstruct under Marine Life 2030. In the meantime, the Census of Marine Life left us with some very important tools, including the Ocean Biodiversity Information System. And we have now constituted the Marine Biodiversity Observation Network that happened in the mid-2000s, 2014, under the umbrella of the Group on Earth Observations Biodiversity Observation Network. And MBON is intended to be a network of people and groups to look at marine biodiversity, formalize standards, and so on. But we need a lot more partners. We need to partner with GOOS, with OBIS, with UNEP, WCMC, with all of your institutions. And that's what we thought Marine Life 2030 could do. And so that's the proposal for the decade that we just got endorsed back in June. So the reason why we do this is that even today, after all of this progress, we have a good observing system for the oceans for physics and for biogeochemistry, but very poor for marine life. So many of the predictions that we want to do in forecasting for ocean uses that require information about biodiversity today are not possible. So this is the main goal of Marine Life 2030, is organizing that capability to address the economic value, the conservation needs for the ocean. So what we're going to do is we need to connect science and users. We need to build the capacity to focus around essential ocean variables and essential biodiversity variables. We want to do that in a standardized way so that we can compare measurements around the world and make them useful, so that if we see change in one location, that we know that that is actually driven by local change or how it fits in a global or regional context. And we want to broaden participation of everyone in this activity. So it is an open network. We invite everybody to participate and to collaborate in what we're going to show you here. So some of the basic language that we want to advance is the use of the essential ocean variables. So essential ocean variables are kind of a parallel framework as the essential climate variables. So they're very linked. And in this case, there's essential ocean variables for biology. These are required. These are the core observations that you need to develop the essential biodiversity variables. If you think of essential biodiversity variables as maps that change over time of biodiversity information, you need to have the fundamental observations in a standardized way, in an open and shared manner that we're trying to put together through what we call the bioeco EOVs. And then we want to put that through this framework, which I'll try to walk you through. This is what is called the Framework for Ocean Observing. And again, it's about it's not new. It was published in 2012, and we're still trying to implement it for biology. In this framework, the needs that you have, that every country has, are documented by the Global Ocean Observing System. And the Global Ocean Observing System sets the requirements and the specifications for the essential ocean variables. MBON is one of the networking tools that we have to bring the community together, working with, for example, the Ocean Best Practices System around standards and how you collect the data and how you store the data and how you share the data openly to the public through devices like OBIS. So OBIS is one of the data outlets that is open and available and can make products that can inform the community. And this loop is closed. So this entire system is what we're calling Marine Life 2030. So at this point, the Ocean Decade has made a new call for actions, and I welcome you to go to this page. This is what they call the Stakeholder Forum. We need people to consider writing proposals for projects and individual activities that are linked to Marine Life 2030 through this page. And so we are willing to work with you in developing those. Those proposals are due every 6 months. So they just announced this call for proposals. The proposals are due in January, and then in 6 months after January, they will have another, or after October, sorry, they will have another call for proposals. If you want to join Marine Life 2030 as individuals, you do that directly with us. And that's the one thing that we're going to walk through today. So today we want to talk about volunteer efforts. At the moment, the decade has no money. Marine Life 2030 has the funding that people that committed to write the proposal came in with. So Brazil, Japan, the US, Europe, come in with existing projects or time that they want to commit to this effort. We need to grow that to the level of what Marine Life 2030 requires, which is, we estimate, about $1 billion for the decade. So we need to do that with working around events that Linwood is going to talk to you after Kristen gives you some of the mechanisms that we have for communication. The part of the effort is going to be filling and joining through this form. And this is something that we're going to post on the Marine Life 2030 website. I think maybe Jose can paste the link for this form online now on the chat. Basically, we will ask you to join and help us with all of these activities that are listed on the right. If you want to contact us directly, please write me at carib.usf.edu or Gabriel Canonico. We're both trying to lead or organize, at least initially, the program as we stand it up. There's many other people involved in organizing the Marine Life 2030 effort behind the scenes. One of them is Linwood Pendleton, and Kristen Yarincik is also, and you will hear from her next. So thank you.
Hi, thanks, Frank. And as Frank mentioned, I'm going to just share with you quickly the marinelife2030.org website. So hopefully everyone can see this right now. We have our beautiful logo. Thanks for the compliments on that in the chat. So I just want to say it's still a work in progress. The program was endorsed in June, and we've been working to get these communication mechanisms up and running, but they're still evolving, and the website itself will continue to be updated as activities and structures and other components of Marine Life 2030 evolve as well. So one thing we really did want to highlight here, though, are the very many partners that are involved in this project, not just the logos that you see at the top, but a very long list of academic and NGO and government and private sector partners. So thanks to all of you who've shown this interest, and we hope that additional partners will join us. In this box below is where we will link the Google form for signing up for various activity or working group leadership. The decade proposal is linked here. The Air Center also put that in the chat. So this is another place where you can go and find it. And then we have a temporary solution to contacting us, and we'll continue to evolve that, as well as some social media mechanisms and other communication as we go forward. So.
Thanks, Kristen. And I think I'm next. Is that right, Frank? Yep. So, I think even more important than adding to that long list of partners is now getting you really engaged. And that really is the point of these networking Fridays, is for all of us to get to know each other, to figure out what we're doing and how we can each help Marine Life 2030, and to learn more about the opportunities to do that and build trust among us. So I'm not going to show you a presentation, but I'm just going to talk you through how the Ocean Knowledge Action Network is working with Marine Life 2030 to bite off just a small part of this really big challenge that Frank mentioned. Now, I think all of you know that a core principle behind the decade is that we need to transform the way we do science to make sure that the science really provides the information that decision makers need, whether they're trying to decide what to eat, where to fish, where to play, and what to protect. And so that requires that we co-design the science that we do with the people who need to use the science. And the Ocean Knowledge Action Network was created to both catalyze the co-design of science, thinking about the ocean decade, but also many of these other international initiatives, but even local initiatives, because I think all of this ocean science needs to be co-designed if it's going to be effective. And then to facilitate that. And to do that, the Ocean Knowledge Action Network was set up as part of this Future Earth network, which includes a lot of organizations, many of which you belong to. And it is different than all the other knowledge action networks at Future Earth in that it has an international project office. And so I'm the executive director of that international project office. And this project office is hosted in France by a consortium that includes the French CNRS, UBO, my university, the Sorbonne University, IRD, and I see people here from IRD, Ifremer, the space agency, and it really is it's a big French effort to really make this can work. And what we're doing with Marine Life 2030 and what we're doing generally is trying to create two kinds of networks in a new sort of way. So one network is a vertical network that really begins with end users. How do you find people who need marine life science in order to make decisions, whether it's where to put aquaculture or where to begin restoring ecosystems? And then how do you understand their needs and link them then to scientists and researchers who can provide those needs? And how do you provide these scientists and stakeholders with the means of actually engaging? Engaging with each other is not so easy. And so this is where facilitators come into play. There are lots of programs now on different approaches to the co-design of science inside and outside of the ocean world. How do you monitor and measure your success? And how do you find funders who are willing to do that? So the Ocean Knowledge Action Network is trying to create new vertical networks to do this. But we're also trying to find new ways of sharing information horizontally. So once you have the vertical connections made, working in one place or one region, how do you share knowledge about how that co-design is working with other places on the planet? Because we're learning by doing in many cases, and we want to be able to share this information in real time. A lot of time, that information about how co-design works is locked in people's heads because we tend to write less about that and more about the science that we do. So to really get concrete and try to find new ways of doing this, what we've done at the OKAN is we've selected just a couple of decade science programs to work with directly. Marine Life 2030 is one of those. But of course, as Frank mentioned, by working with Marine Life 2030, we are in fact working with a lot of the biodiversity and marine life oriented programs of the decade. And then we're working with 3 decade networking programs. So there's SmartNet, the ECOPS network, and Empowering Women for the Decade. And then we're really trying to connect them with end users in some very specific places. And so if we start east and go west, we're working with partners at Future Earth Taipei. We're working with the University of the Seychelles. We're working with Nelson Mandela University in South Africa, the University of Ghana, and then the Federal University of Sao Paulo, and then finally, a group of partners in California. These are places where we're really focusing on end user needs and learning how to listen, how to build trust, how to build relationships with these end users. And this is going to vary, of course, across these different places because the cultures are very different, the approaches are very different. So we are working with Marine Life 2030 to do that. In the first year, we're just going to focus there. We're going to focus on the decade programs that I mentioned. And then we're going to focus on the science networks that are our sister networks through the Future Earth network. That includes MBER and SOLAS and Future Earth Coast and PAGES, which is a paleo geological network, and Earth System Governance has an Oceans Task Force. So we're doing that to really try to figure out how do we do this effectively, because I'm sure, as you all know, we have now so many programs, so many networks, so many initiatives that communicating with each other has become increasingly difficult. So to do that, we're really trying to make sure that we come up with a new way of connecting networks to each other to begin with, to plan our activities in a more coherent way, and then to make sure that our activities are well planned with the decade activity. And so to do that, we're working with an organization in Denmark called Actor Global to co-design a network of networks platform that we hope will work well with the kinds of platforms you are already working on with the Global Stakeholder Forum and others. So this first year, we'll just be focused to try to figure out our way of working with the decade, the way of working with Marine Life 2030. And as we do this, we expect to expand quite rapidly. So upcoming to begin to test some of these ideas and figure out our way of working, we'll have a half-day networking session at the Ocean Sciences meeting, where we have a hybrid event. You all know now that the Ocean Sciences meeting is going to be virtual, but we're having in-person meetings in South Africa, in Brazil, and California. And the idea is to bring stakeholders together there and then bring the scientists from Marine Life 2030 and its affiliated other decade networks to the stakeholders in these places. And we're working with SmartNet, ECOPS, and Empowering Women to help provide each of these hubs with that networking flavor that each of these networking programs provides. So for instance, SmartNet is going to help us in California. The ECOPS are working with us in Brazil. And the ECOPS are working with us in South Africa, and Empowering Women is working with us in Brazil. The idea is to really catalyze some relationships, begin the process of talking to each other so we can figure out how to co-design proposals together. We'll take from that and have a learning around that and do it again. And so we're now planning on doing a similar process in the Caribbean. And the goal is really to get the ball rolling so that proposals that are presented to the decade are co-designed. And this is something that the decade is already promoting and is creating materials. We're trying to get it into people's hands and help people use that to co-design proposals for Marine Life 2030 that really makes sense for the end user and then makes sense for Marine Life 2030 overall. So I'll stop there and let's see if we can open it up to questions for all three of us.
Yeah, I think that we're going to try and see how this works virtually. For many months now, we have had people and conversations through chats. So we'll try to, if you want to open the microphone, raise your hand. The Air Center will then allow you to unmute, and we will see how this goes.
I see Jennifer Sunday has her hand up.
That was an error. I must have been hovering over it. So I don't, but my mind is whirling. I'll think of something.
Would you like to tell us who you are?
Sure. Okay, sure. Yeah. I'm Jennifer Sunday. I'm at McGill University in Canada and super interested in this. We've doing some big, large-scale networked eDNA sampling last summer and thinking about writing a proposal and looking for funding for this upcoming call.
You know, when you think about writing proposals, it's really important to think about co-design before you even begin writing it. So this is certainly something that we at Marine Life 2030 and the Ocean Knowledge Action Network can talk to you about. We're trying to find new ways of engaging stakeholders in this co-design proposal because, of course, you know, most stakeholders aren't paid to participate in these proposal writing processes, and they can't afford to take the time to write a proposal that only has a 10% chance of being funded. So I'm really interested to see what you do, and please reach out if you do find that you are open to some ideas about how to do this differently.
Just I want to follow up on a comment with Jennifer, because the Ocean Decade is having these calls for actions, for proposals, including the project proposals that we're requesting to be linked to Marine Life 2030 and other programs, and they come with no funding, right? So this is something that we have to internalize. We have to see how we deal with it, and this is a conversation that we have to have. I don't know, Linwood, if you have ideas, but the proposals that we write need to perhaps go in parallel to an agency that can fund it, and then we can implement the activities. Because the decade, all the decade is giving us is an enormous platform, visible, very, very, very visible, but it doesn't provide the funding that we need to get things done.
One of the things that we're doing in the places I mentioned is trying to map out what are the needs for marine life science, who are the people who need this information, who are the scientists locally who can provide it, what scientists aren't available locally that we need to bring in from elsewhere, and then what are the funding opportunities. And when you bring all those together, you start to see an intersection, which these may not be the most important places or the most important projects overall, but they're the low-hanging fruit to begin working together and doing this co-design. And so that's really where we want to focus in these first couple of years. We've been talking for the last year at the Marine Life 2030 level, but sort of all the decade programs have been talking at a very high level. And now we're ready to start working and to start creating these relationships. And we want to do that learning by doing. I see Alex has got his hand up.
Yeah, thanks. Thanks, Linwood. I'm actually putting together a roadmap at the moment for a major funder for a global biodiversity project. And if it's funded, it could be funded to the tune of $50 to $200 million over that 10 years. We obviously have reached out to a broad body of the marine community who are involved in species description, public engagement, handling data, and capacity development. The funder very much wants to see an emphasis here on species description, but obviously, you know, we're not going to be describing species just for the fun of it. We do want to, you know, end up at the end of the day with something which significantly contributes to, you know, the needs of humankind. We're running to a very, very tight deadline. So what would be enormously helpful to us would be assistance with making contact with these stakeholders that you've talked about, so that we do get strong input from them, particularly from governments, but also from other people working on the ground in low-income low-income countries.
Yeah. I think that's really important, and we can do that in those countries that I mentioned, but I think there are those of you out there that probably have similar networks in countries I haven't mentioned. And the reason we're working in those countries I've mentioned is because they've been very active in the development of the Ocean Knowledge Action Network since its development stages, which began in Kiel at a Future Earth Oceans meeting in 2016. But this sort of thing is happening elsewhere. One Ocean Hub has been doing work that's quite similar to this. And I think what we want to do with these network meetings is really get you to raise your hand. And when you go to the survey that will be on the Marine Life 2030 website, it will ask you very specifically, where can you provide leadership? Is it at a regional level, a global level, or a country level? And if it's at the country level, which countries? Because while there are big programs that will be launched at the kinds of levels that Alex mentioned, Marine Life 2030 will also be built from the bottom up by a lot of smaller programs. And so one of the things that Marine Life 2030 must do is respond to the opportunities at all scales and all levels, but at the same time, bring this sort of scientific expertise to it, bring interoperability and best practices to this work so that the sum is greater than the individual, or the whole is greater than the sum of the parts, so to speak. So we can help you, Alex, but I also hope that there are other people here today that will go to the website, take that survey, so we can begin to give you an even bigger list of potential partners that can work with you.
So before passing to Christina, we have some questions in the Q&A. So Antonio Jorge da Silva asks, how welcome will be project proposals to develop instrumentation, particularly low cost, to observe littoral ocean domains at several timescales in non-aggressive minimum interference approach?
I think the answer is very welcome if you have an end user that needs this information. So this is sort of getting back to what Alex was saying and what Frank was saying. If you can really tie that to someone who needs this kind of information about marine life to make critical decisions, that's exactly what we want. I think it's really going to vary from place to place. And so there are many, many opportunities here to do that.
So, and we have another question from Rebecca Martone. I don't know if I'm spelling this right, but she asks, how does Marine Life 2030 have ideas for the types of end users and how the information could be packaged to entice co-design? Often the process is iterative, and having examples of how this can work can spark the conversation and development.
Yeah. I think we do have ideas now. I'll mention some, but I think it's really important that when we talk about end users and stakeholders, we're really clear about who we're talking about, because I do hear people talking about end users as if they're all the same. And in some cases, these end users are government ministers. In other cases, they're consumers and they're fishers and they're park managers. And so, all of these people working in the ocean need marine life information. They need different kinds of marine life information. So one of the challenges, I think, for us, but it's also the opportunity, is to listen and to figure out what are the species that you need to know about? What's the scale at which you need information? What's the frequency that this information needs to be updated? Because we have to be able to provide you with data that can be used to make decisions, but that decision will depend. And so some of us are really good at working with people at the government level. Some of us are good at working with local fishers and marine protected areas managers. Others are quite good at working at international levels, like the BB&J. Kristen is going to talk in a second, her hand's up. So there are just innumerable, I think, decision makers and end users who could use this information. A lot of times they don't know what science it is they need. And that is one of our big challenges and the things that we have to overcome. So we have to become better at listening so we can bring to them information, not necessarily science and data the way we think about it as scientists. But that requires understanding the decisions they're making, when is the right opportunity for input, scientific input, and then how do we build trust, not just between the scientists and the end users, but how do we make sure that the end users trust the science itself and the data that are produced? So it's a complicated process, but it's a process that's been done many times in the ocean, but we don't often communicate about it well. And it's been done outside of the ocean sphere. And so this is really part of what the Ocean Knowledge Action Network is trying to do with its partners, is bring these resources together so we can share these learnings.
Yeah, if I can jump in too, this is a huge task, but these audiences, and Linwood's absolutely right that there are going to be different types with different needs. But there will be a lot of overlap with these marine life oriented programs. And so where can we build and leverage one another's activities to benefit all of us? And that's something the Marine Life 2030 partners are starting to do, first with the Ocean Knowledge Action Network event in February, and also some other coordination-oriented workshops that we'll be organizing for that purpose, to start to align our activities, understand what one another is doing, and map out a way we can collaborate and maximize impact while kind of spreading, utilizing the work that will be being done across the programs.
Christina, do you want to just say your question since your hand is still up?
Sure. I don't know how to turn on the camera, so you'll see my siphonophore. I'm just wondering I'm very excited about sort of your base projects and your plans. And of course, those of us working on areas beyond national jurisdiction and the emerging treaty are trying to figure out a place to plant the design and implementation of marine protected areas beyond national boundaries, but also making sure that they're interconnected with areas within national jurisdiction, and also to provide the basis for something more akin to really the integrated ecosystem assessment that we're familiar with in the US, but ideally leading to some sort of more coherent marine plan that looks at what the sectoral players are doing, but also starts to define, as you said, the areas in need of protection. So this needs to be sort of at the same time, but not blocking progress on real marine protected areas. But how do we start to complement that by building in the regional and sectoral players, but also the global interests? So I'd love to talk further about this.
I think it's a really interesting question, because the decade really seeks to catalyze new science, but it has to be done in the context of existing science and processes. And so I think when I hear what you're saying, Christina, I think that there are probably opportunities, whether it's creating EBSAs or helping manage RFMOs, where we could do new science in a co-designed way that would supplement existing science, maybe make it more actionable. I think any of those things would be welcome from Marine Life 2030. From the Ocean Knowledge Action Network perspective, many of the countries I mentioned are participants in these areas beyond jurisdiction policymaking fora, and we could work that way. But as I said, the ocean can is just biting off a small part. And so if there were somebody else who really wanted to lead a network that was really focused on a co-design for areas beyond national jurisdiction, I think that would be welcome, and I would love to work with you that way. But as I mentioned, the ocean can will expand pretty quickly after another 6 months. And so if there's the demand for this kind of work in areas beyond national jurisdiction, that could be a year 2 focal point. Frank, do you have anything to add to that?
I'm actually looking at the chat. There's a lot of really interesting comments. For example, one of the impressions that people have is that biology and measuring biodiversity is very difficult. And I think that this is an impression that was true perhaps 20, 30 years ago, but that now is not so true. The technology still has to evolve. The technology has to be brought down in price. And one thing that we need to recognize is that in biology, many of us collect data, but it's not always shared. It's not always shared in the proper formats. And now there are standards. There's actually a whole set of family of standards for how do you code taxonomy data in a digital manner. There's standards for genomics data, and those can be paired up just like people share wind information or people share ocean salinity and temperature data to improve models and understanding how the world is changing. That's where we need to get to with biology, so that we can forecast biology and biodiversity in the same way that we forecast weather. This is a big goal. It sounds simple to say that, but that's where we want to go. And I think that we have technologies today that can bring us closer to that vision, but we need to bring the cost of technology down. We need to standardize methods so that the information can be compared. And so that's part of that we need to do during the decade, is open up the desks of scientists, find ways for people to be recognized by what they're contributing, which is part of the blockage that we have, understand how the physics community did it, and just, make sure that this is purposely aimed at solving humanity's problems.
But let me also mention that by having a bar for rigor that is too high, that has led to a lack of data in many parts of the world, and a lack of data that people need to make decisions. And so part of the goal with the decade, I think, in Marine Life 2030 is to start the other way around and say, how much rigor is needed to answer the questions that I have as someone trying to live by the ocean, work at the ocean, or plan around the ocean. And often that's a lower bar than we as scientists set out. And I think that's where these new techniques that I was seeing in the chat box, low-cost techniques, things that are lower tech, can really come into play. If we can start working from the user's needs back up and make sure that the science that's being done still meets the goals of interoperability, still meets best practices as much as possible, but build our knowledge that way. Because a lot of this is about creating demand for marine life data. And that means we're going to collect data in these first years that is not perfect, but it'll get better as people see its usefulness. And so really, I also look at Victor Magat's question here. It's like, how can the study benefit marine geologists? How can it benefit biologists? We really want to turn that around and get marine geologists thinking, how can marine geology benefit end users who are dealing with the marine life in the ocean? And we're going to have this meeting, we hope, with the PAGES program, where we'd like to really get a paleogeologist thinking about what is it that paleogeologists do that can help us manage marine life? Because it's probably the case that stakeholders and non-paleogeologists aren't aware of the full spectrum of tools and science that can be brought to the table. So I really want scientists to kind of really think about, how can you help through Marine Life 2030? How can you help people make good decisions about sustainable ocean management? And then you will receive benefits back. But the point of the decade is not really to try to figure out how to benefit geologists and biologists. It's the other way around.
So before going to Frank, I want to pass to Felicia, which is a student from South Africa, and that could bring a different perspective to this conversation. Felicia, are you there? Well, she has her hand raised, but maybe she's not listening. You can go on, Frank, sorry.
Yeah, I hope people take this opportunity. We can stay even beyond the hour if people want to continue to have the conversation. One of the things I want to complement what Linwood was saying in terms of the disciplines. We often see this is about biology or this is about physics, and we have siloed each other in ways that are probably not that useful. So we do want to think of the essential ocean variables as a complement things that are interdisciplinary. So you need temperature to understand biology, and you need measurements of ocean chemistry to understand biology, and biology to understand how ocean chemistry is changing. And ultimately, we want to see how science informs the public about a change that may not be totally visible to people so that you can make a decision, but also very fundamentally help answer questions. For example, one of the things that we do, so the question is, how do you use biology? Well, many people are using temperature, salinity, oxygen, measurements that are very fundamental from a physical and chemical point of view to derive information by proxy about where species may occur, or you may use a geological map of sediment types to understand what species may live in one place, but we're not measuring the measurements of species. So we're doing modeling by proxy using geological, chemical, and physical variables, but much of that is based on very, very basic life history data that you can harvest from some papers, historicals. But we want to incorporate biology into that universe of multidisciplinary measurements to answer what, so it's not just looking at fresh water on land or just the ocean. Many of our maps look at the ocean, and then we have a blank over land, or the other way around. The land people put a blank over the ocean and they just look at land. So when we talk about global biodiversity, we should look at this as an integrated planet. It's just one planet, you know, so we need to think about it and looking at things in a different way.
Yeah. Felicia, you put your hand back down. Do you want to say something? Maybe not. I want to answer Felix's question, which is, what's the difference between co-design as I'm talking about it and cooperation or joint activities? And I think the big difference is that co-design starts with the management problem at hand. And like I said, it could be what you decide to eat. It could be something from a consumer to a vacationer or someone living at the sea, all the way up to someone who's managing a fleet of ships or whatever. So I think what we want to get away from is involving people in the science process after the science has been decided. We don't want to start with a scientific approach or a tool and then say, who can use it? That's like looking under the light post for your keys. What we want to do is start with, well, the ocean, we know the ocean we have and the ocean we think we might get is not necessarily the ocean we want. How do we get there? How do we make those changes so we get the ocean we want? And then what science do we need so we can make good decisions? And those decisions are sometimes very large scale planning decisions, and sometimes they're just day-to-day decisions. So we want to find ways of figuring out what are the decisions that require marine life data and science, and how can we provide the information that is needed in a way so it actually makes a difference to the quality of decisions that are being made, so we get a more sustainable and productive ocean. So it involves cooperation, it involves joint work, it involves openness and transparency, but it is mission oriented, it is stakeholder driven, and I think that's the big difference.
So following Frank's comment, we have another comment and a question in the chat from Christina that says that she loves the idea of bringing multidisciplines together. And she asks if we have plans to test the application of essential biodiversity variables in the open ocean and deep sea. The IDOS, which is the Integrated Deep Ocean Observation System, is hoping to work on some pilot sites in the deep sea. But what mechanisms are there to couple these with water column, migratory species connectivity efforts?
Yeah, I think that this point that Christina brings up and a similar point that Neil Davies brings up on how do we link these different programs. IDOS, Challenger 150 is another deep ocean program under the decade. The Ocean Biomolecular Observing Network, OKAN, all of these are endorsed programs and we have common interests. So one of the ways that we're trying to help each other or help streamline the language is working through the language of essential ocean variables. So we are not proposing to just measure the biology essential ocean variables. We need to see what is the minimum set of essential ocean variables, be it physics, chemistry, or biogeochemistry and biology, that need to be measured together to address a certain problem. How do you stand up a system that can do that in different places so you can compare the information? And how do you do it over time so you can see how the ocean is changing in a way that you can manage a human process so you can mitigate or change what is happening? So the answer, Christina, is yes. We are trying to work very hard to establish links with DOOS, the Deep Ocean Observing System. We're trying to work with Challenger 150 and the conversation that we're having leading up to this call. And we're going to continue that. We're doing that through several mechanisms. And part of the issue that we have is that because the decade has now stood up over 30 different programs, many of them with similar or overlapping interests, we have to figure a way that we don't run each other into the ground by having 30 separate governance systems, 30 separate conversations about similar topics. So how do we join IDOOS and OBON and Marine Life 2030 and Supreme and all of these other ones with other existing programs that also need to be part of the conversation? And that's the challenge. No, so the answer is yes. It's not just looking at the bottom of the ocean or just the surface ocean or just the coast. It's how do we get together to an integrated set of programs that provide us the knowledge that we need. But I'd like to hear from people actually.
Frank, because we're running out of time, I want to answer Hassan Mustafad's question because it's the most important question of the day, which is what do we mean in the survey by leading key aspects of Marine Life 2030? Well, Marine Life 2030 is a huge, ambitious undertaking. And right now, the sort of active core team that's been trying to manage these parts is relatively small. So what we're doing for this survey is we're looking for those at this point who can really step up and say, I want to lead at sort of a big Marine Life 2030 level, or I want to lead at a regional level, or I want to lead at my country level, capacity building, stakeholder engagement. Some of you are really good at fundraising. So, we need help with fundraising and coming up with the fundraising strategy and a plan. Frank just mentioned governance. We're going to have governance. Our governance is going to have to work with others. That takes time, and we need people to do this. So this survey is the first slice at this, and we're really looking for people who can invest time to lead this at the task force or task group level, at the leadership team level. We need that list of partners there to start stepping up and biting off parts of the whole process that we need to move Marine Life 2030 forward.
So we had we have someone from Brazil, Bárbara Pinheiro.
Hello, can you hear me?
Yes.
Yes.
Hi, hello everybody. I'm Bárbara. I'm from Northeast Brazil, from Federal University of Alagoas. And first I want to congratulate for the project. It's amazing. And I'm also part of a group that's a volunteer group to mobilize and engage people to act in the ocean decade here in Brazil. So my question is, besides all these connections among scientists, is this Marine Life 2030 have already a strategy for communicate with the society, or does it have any kind of citizen science projects or applications where people can engage with those information that we are gathering, as a scientists? How can we connect? I know that it's already a huge challenge to connect all the scientists, but how are we gonna connect with the society and show them all the results that we are gonna start to having during this decade?
The answer is we need help there. We need someone to take a leadership position. And I'm looking at the survey now, and I realize that we did not include that.
Exactly.
But we did have other. So, you know, Jose hopefully is still listening, but if he's not, Joana has editorial power over this survey.
Yes,
She
I'll
can
pay
add that very
attention.
quickly, but that's really important, Barbara. So thank you for adding that. But also, please feel free to lead that. And I think that you don't have to be senior to lead that. You don't have to be famous to lead that. You know, we need people that are just willing to take time and that have a lot of creativity. And I want to say, for if we have early career researchers out there, it is by far the case that younger researchers are more comfortable with transdisciplinary work in co-design. And this is an opportunity for you to lead. There are no slots here for token early career ocean professionals. This is open for everybody. If you're young and you want to lead, sign up through the website and start leading and really make a difference here. And so I don't know what stage you are, Barbara. Joana mentioned.
I'm a researcher, postdoc researcher. I finished PhD in 2017.
So you'd be great. And you know, if you're like concerned, contact me or Frank, and we can say what's the right level of leadership for you.
Okay, thank you.
Thank you. Okay, we're at the end of our time, Joanna, aren't we?
Yes, I was thinking of that. So I don't know if you want to stay a little bit more, or if we finish by now. We have a couple of questions still on the chat that you can also answer by email. So
yeah, I can't stay, so I will have to go.
Okay.
But thank you, everybody. It was great to see this many people turn out for our first networking event. We'd like to see more of you taking the role that I took today, so we can learn about you, particularly if you're going to step up and help the decade. So I think we'll get back to you. Some of you have mentioned projects and programs that I think will really be helpful for Marine Life 2030, and we'd like to have you come and talk to us at future meetings. Okay. Thank you, everybody.
Thank you.
Thank you very much for your attendance. And I hope to see you soon taking some leadership role at the Marine Life 2030, helping us to build this ocean decade forward.
Thank you, Joanna.
Thank you, Joanna.
Bye.
And thank you, Air Center.